What is going on, guys? Welcome back to another video. So it's Tuesday, which means it's time for our weekly tier list Tuesday. And considering the 2024-2025 season might be coming to an end tonight if the Florida Panthers win in Game 6, and regardless in Game 7 on Friday, someone's going to be a Stanley Cup champion. So I decided to get ahead of it and tier list every single team's 2024-2025 season based on what their preseason expectations were. Did they live up to them, or if their expectations changed throughout the season due to some moves that they made. Young guys that they take sizable steps. Maybe you sucked in the standings, but your young core proved that they're really going to be special in a couple of years. How did the playoffs go? Were you cup or bust, and you didn't win the Stanley Cup? You didn't even make the Stanley Cup final. So yeah, here's the tier list. Huge success, smashed expectations as well as player development. Good year, okay season, pretty bad, and a brutal season. Let's get into it. Up first, Montreal Canadiens. One of the best seasons in terms of smashing expectations. Coming into the season, they were expected to kind of take a step out of being like a bottom 5 team in prior years, but only like, if they got 84 or 85 points, I think it would have been like, that's a step in the right direction. They ended up making the Stanley Cup playoffs off the backs of an amazing season by Nick Suzuki, proving that he's not just the number one center, he's a top 15 sniffing top 10 center in the NHL, as well as Lane Hudson winning the Calder Trophy. Caulfield got back on track goal scoring wise. Slavkovsky maybe didn't take a massive step, but proved that he has a 50-point floor at this point. Line A, much needed on the power play. Even strength is amazing. Outside of like Kirby, Doc, basically everybody within this young core continued to develop. So it's a huge success for the Montreal Canadiens. On the exact opposite side of that is the New York Rangers, arguably the most underwhelming, disappointing season in the NHL, considering they were coming off a President's Trophy Eastern Conference Finals appearance against Florida Panthers, where they went 6 games, missed the playoffs, only 85 points, basically like blew up their team throughout the season in terms of trading guys like Trouba, Kakko. It was kind of disaster, and they potentially don't even have their first round pick this season because of the JT Miller trade. Go watch my video where I regrade all the deadline moves. Next up, Dallas. I'm going to go with pretty bad. Again, they made it to the Western Conference Finals, but they made it to Western Conference Finals the prior 2 seasons. And this year, more so than the prior 2 years, they went ultra aggressive in terms of the Granlund as well as the Rantanen trade. I know Rantanen's going to be there to stay, but this is going to be their best roster. This was their best roster for at least the next 2 to 3 years, considering the names that they're going to lose this summer, most likely. So yeah, although again, one of the final 4 teams in the NHL, pretty underwhelming, pretty disappointing season. They're definitely at least an okay season. You can't say it's a good year for the Dallas Stars this season, as well as Robertson, not quite getting back to 2023 for him. Johnston played about the same, was solid down the stretch. Harley did take steps, but yeah, overall, pretty bad considering they were cup or bust. Next up for the Chicago Blackhawks, Bedard didn't take a huge step, which is a little bit concerning, but considering Frank Nazar was like half a point per game at the NHL level, the way Sam Renzel looked at the end of the season, Vlasic proved that he's going to be a good top 4 defenseman, and they moved off the Seth Jones contract. Although they're retaining some on that for a rebuilding season, I think it was a pretty okay year for the Chicago Blackhawks, and they're selecting 3rd overall. As a result, for Philadelphia, I'm going to go with good year, mainly just because Matthew Michkov proved that he's a legit stud with the 60-point season. They're picking 6th overall. They finally moved off Scott Laughton after like 3 straight years of like, will they, won't they trade Scott Laughton, fired Tortorella. So yeah, they brought in Rick Tocchet. So I think it's a pretty damn good season for Philadelphia when compared to last year. They overperformed, but it probably like hurt them in the long run, if that makes sense. Washington, huge success. No shit here. We had him as like a fringe wild card team after being one of the worst wild card teams of recent memory last season, sneaking in. But yeah, they were the number 1 seed in the Eastern Conference. McMichael, Protas, Sandin, Thompson was awesome. So like the amount of young guys that took sizable steps on this team really just got to give you a bunch of hope for them. Also, yeah, again, this is more so the in-season stuff that they did. I'm not really looking at the off-season. Detroit Red Wings, I'm gonna go with okay, just because Raymond proved that he's a legit star in the NHL. Edvinson was solid. Yes, they didn't make the playoffs again, but I didn't have them with that defense score that they had. I did not expect the playoffs. So just considering some of their young guys did look solid, Marco Kasper as well, I'm gonna go with okay. I feel like some people will have them in bad. They're definitely not brutal, but it's closer to pretty bad than definitely good year, though. The New Jersey Devils made it back into the playoffs, so you can't be like too mad on this season, but it was a pretty injury-riddled season. Jack Hughes, at this point, you're very concerned about him going forward with his shoulder, but you got back into the playoffs. Even though you got dismantled by the Carolina Hurricanes, that was kind of the expectation at that point. It's not like you gave up a bunch of assets this season, although you give up a 2nd and a 3rd round pick to get Dumoulin and Glass. It's okay, but next year they definitely need to at least make some noise in the playoffs, or else it will be a pretty bad or brutal season. The Tampa Bay Lightning, you got to go with brutal season. Although Kucherov was awesome, although most of their guys, Brandon Hagel, fully solidified himself as like a top 40 player in the NHL. At this point, it is cup or bust, or at least make it back to the Eastern Conference Finals for the Tampa Bay Lightning after 3 straight first-round exits at this point. Yeah, 3 straight, I believe. 2023, they lost to the Toronto Maple Leafs. Yeah, so it's unacceptable when you have such an old core and you trade your 2 first-round picks or 2 future first-round picks for Gord and Bjorkstrand. For St. Louis, huge success. The offer sheets worked out amazing in Holloway and Broberg, as well as the fact that they made the playoffs after an amazing stretch down the end. Robert Thomas solidified his spot as a no-doubt top 50 player in the NHL. Binnington bounced back in a big way. You got to be very excited. Jake Neighbors had another strong season. At the end of the season, he got snuggered with the NHL team. Very, very solid. For the Ottawa Senators, I'm going to go with good year. I had them in the playoffs, so I'm not really sure that they over exceeded expectations in my personal book. Like last year, they probably should have been fighting for a playoff spot or making a playoff spot. It's not as shocking as the Montreal Canadiens, but definitely a good season to make the playoffs. And Jake Sanderson solidified himself as a top 20 player. How many times am I going to say solidified in this video? The Utah Hockey Club. I think this is a huge success, in part because they jumped up to 4th overall. I am counting that. So New York Islanders might be a little bit higher. But when looking at Utah, Gunther was awesome. His extension that he signed back in the fall looks like one of the best deals in the NHL going forward. Logan Cooley took another sizable step. Looks like a legit number 1 center. Sergachev in his first season was a good number 1 defenseman for the most part. Top 20-ish guy. And yeah, now they're picking 4th overall, despite having, I think, 89 or 90 points this season, being in the wild card race for the first time in a while. Awesome season by the Utah Hockey Club. Now the Utah Mammoth. Big failure by the Boston Bruins, though. After all the offseason moves that they made this summer, you expected them to be around the playoff team, considering they were a 109-point team. The prior season, I would say that they had a better season than like the Rangers, just because they sold heavily come at the deadline, so they recouped some assets with the Carlo and Marchand deals. And Middlestat deal that I really like, the Coyle deal, but still, for the expectations, Pasternak's still in his prime, and you wasted another great year from David Pastrnak. Him towards the end of the season was unreal. Brutal for the Boston Bruins. For Pittsburgh, it was a little bit of an interesting season. They came in with maybe the off chance of making the playoffs, but quickly you realized that wasn't going to happen. Traded Marcus Pettersson away for eventually what might become the 12th overall selection. So yeah, it's okay. They need to nuke it this summer. I've said that multiple times. For the Minnesota Wild, I'm going to go with just okay. Got back. It's basically the Devils, if that makes sense. Got back into playoff consideration. It would have been awesome if Kaprizov could have stayed healthy. Brock Faber had a bit of a down year this season. Marco Rossi did take a step. Will he be on your team next year? TBD. But Gustafsson bounced back in a big way. That I think it's an okay. They're closer to good than okay, though, in my opinion. The Edmonton Oilers, this is obviously dependent on if they come back and win the Stanley Cup final, considering they made Game 7 of the Stanley Cup last year. Right now, I'm going to put them in good year, just because, again, they got to win 2 more games. If they lose, you might honestly be able to put them in an okay season if they lose in 6 games. But yeah, it's tough because they lost Zach Hyman in the Stanley Cup, or in the Western Conference Finals, and didn't have him from the Stanley Cup final. But it'll be slightly disappointing, but they should be running back the same team, and there's no reason why they can't win it. Next year, the Los Angeles Kings lost in the first round yet again to the Edmonton Oilers. They didn't play, although Lafreniere was really a revelation for them, and I think can be a good top 6 forward going forward. I didn't like enough. They should have been playing Jordan Spence and Brant Clark a lot more. They lost in the first round. Kopitar Doughty ain't getting any goddamn younger. So I think it's pretty bad, but there are some positives, unlike some other teams. Vancouver basically imploded at times, lost JT Miller, missed the playoffs to the St. Louis Blues. So yeah, I think you got to go with brutal season, and going forward, there's not a lot of hope going forward for them. The Toronto Maple Leafs, pretty bad. Very strong regular season, but again, with this team, considering it's year 7 or 8 of the Austin Matthews era, you expect to make at least the Eastern Conference Finals. That didn't happen. There definitely were some positives. The goalie tandem was awesome. The defense score, in my opinion, was maybe the best defense score of the Matthews era and going forward. But yeah, at this point, lost in the second round because of their top guys did not really show up in games 5 through 7 outside of game 6 with that Matthews goal. Very underwhelming, very underwhelming the way that they went out, even though they went out to potentially the eventual Stanley Cup champions. Unacceptable for them. For Columbus, the way that they were able to overcome everything that happened with Johnny Gaudreau's tragic passing, as well as Patrick Laine just saying, I don't want to be a Columbus Blue Jacket, and they almost made the playoffs. Guys like Fantilli, big second step in his sophomore season. Ken Johnson was near point per game. Marchenko turned into a stud. Werenski was a Norris finalist. Definitely a huge success of a season for the Columbus Blue Jackets. For my New York Islanders, if they were selecting like 10th overall right now, I'd probably have them in pretty bad, maybe even brutal. But they ended up trading Brock Nelson. They had a mediocre season, aggressively mid on the ice, but traded Brock Nelson, now selecting 1st overall. I think you could argue it was honestly a good year. I'm not going to lie, just by getting that 1st overall selection. Nashville, even though they're picking 5th overall, that was not their intention heading into the season. They were dreadful. Dreadful. And the only move that they made at the deadline was trading away Gustav Nyquist. They didn't even sell that heavily to kind of enter their rebuild retool. Bad. Carolina, I'm going to go with okay. Some people might scream, if Dallas is in bad year, how is Carolina not? Carolina clearly, once they traded away Mikko Rantanen, they weren't fully going for it. Not that they sold completely on the season, but they recouped future assets, made it to Eastern Conference Finals, mainly because the Metro kind of was a joke. But I think you're okay with some of the young guys that developed, Jackson Blake especially. I think you're pretty optimistic going forward about the Carolina Hurricanes, even though this year was not that good. I'm going to get shit for this. They were the worst team in the NHL. I've kept on saying this. San Jose had an awesome season. Celebrini, 1,000% legit. Will Smith's rookie year, awesome. Eklund jumped 14 points, as well as the fact that they were able to sell guys at a decent cost, especially Granlund and Wallman getting first-round picks when you didn't retain at all on those guys. Awesome season by San Jose. Seattle, I'm going to go with pretty bad. There are some positives. Shane Wright really popped off. Joey Decord proved that he's a legit starter in the NHL, and they did sell at the deadline and got a good haul for Gordon Bjorkstrand as well as a second for Tanev that I can't fully kill them, but unless they push more further into this kind of retool, maybe even a rebuild, I don't know how they're going to look going forward. The Colorado Avalanche, brutal season. They went ultra aggressive, and although they did bring back Brock Nelson, it resulted in them losing via a Game 7 hat trick by Mikko Rantanen. The Florida Panthers, I think even if they lose in Game 7 to the Edmonton Oilers, it's a huge success. 3 straight Stanley Cup finals. I know people may be numb to it, considering Tampa also did it from 2020 to 2022, but that's an incredible feat. And going forward, unless Bobrovsky falls off a cliff, there's no reason to think that the next 3 years they won't be the cream of the crop in the NHL. So, yeah, another great season by the Florida Panthers. Anaheim Ducks, good year. Dostal proved that he is a legit starter going forward. You would have liked to see more forward development, but I blame Cronin on that more so. And Jackson Lacombe did develop a decent amount in terms of the defenseman. So a good year for them. Winnipeg, good year. It sucks that they lost in the second round, but they did actually finally show some life in that Dallas series and that magical moment in Game 7 against the St. Louis Blues. Cole Perfetti. What else? Who else? Kyle Connor had a career year. Scheifele was awesome. Velarde. Sandberg really emerged and is going to be a key piece going forward. They might lose Ehlers, which will suck, but I still think it was a good year for the Winnipeg Jets, especially getting out of the first round after last year's dismantling by the Colorado Avalanche. Buffalo, I think you can go brutal season. Nobody really took a step on that team. It was very underwhelming. Tage Thompson and Rasmus Dahlin still are an extremely elite players, stars. But besides that, Peterka took a step, but now you might lose him. I don't know. It's bad. It's bad right now in Buffalo land. Calgary, I'll go with okay season. I know that they far exceeded expectations. Dustin Wolf is a franchise netminder, so you got to go with good year when looking at that. Dustin Wolf is that dude, although I'm scared that they're never going to get a franchise forward because they're never going to be picking high in the draft. Dustin Wolf, if he doesn't win a Vezina in his career, especially after this year at the NHL level, I would be quite surprised. And then the Vegas Golden Knights won the division, lost in the second round, which is definitely underwhelming, but I expect them to do stuff this offseason. They didn't go nuclear all in compared to prior seasons, only got Saad just as a free agent and Riley Smith for a third round pick, so you can't kill them too much. So I think it's just pretty bad. And Pavel Dorofeyev really broke out with 35 goals, so that's a positive in terms of the young guys. I think pretty bad is a solid placement for them. But yeah, this is it. I'm blocking off Colorado and Buffalo. Let me know in the comments, what do you think about this tier list? Again, if they win the Stanley Cup, they definitely move up. If they lose in 6, you can maybe move them down, but still they made the Stanley Cup final. I'll be seeing you in the next one. Peace.